There we go. All right. I am here once again with Kevin Vallier. We've talked once before about Kevin's journey towards Christianity, largely, and we're here today to talk about political philosophy and artificial intelligence, which are two topics that I know that he's thinking about a lot these days. But yeah, Kevin, would you like to just say a quick blurb? I'll link to bio and everything, but just about who you are and where you're coming
Yeah.
from.
So I'm a political philosopher at the University of Toledo at the Institute of American Constitutional Thought and Leadership here. I'm not only sort of a political philosopher in the analytics tradition. I've done work in normative ethics, analytic philosophy of religion, philosophy of politics, economics, that's PPE. Um, Probably most people would know me as like, oh, if like a Christian philosopher is doing like traditional political philosophy, like
Mhm.
not just political theory, but traditional political philosophy, that's Kevin. Like that's probably like that area of stuff, like the guy doing Christian political philosophy. That's probably the area.
Yeah,
And so a lot of
yeah.
my stuff, like it branches out into political theology, but it branches out into political economy. Um, and some of a lot of my central questions have to do with how to think from a Christian perspective about organizing institutions in a world of Christians and non-Christians.
Yeah.
Um, and then and then there's the more sort of abstract form of that question, which is about cooperation under conditions of diversity. But I'm interested in that second question because I'm interested in the first question about how to be a Christian in the world, in the political world. And in many ways, that's kind of central question with which I'm concerned.
Okay. All right. Well, yeah. So that's great, and I think you kind of answered actually one of the initial questions I was going to ask. So just picking up right from there. So why does deep moral and religious disagreement pose such a challenge for political legitimacy? Why has that occupied your attention?
So, I mean, it's a really good question. Part of the issue arises from just like the logic of toleration. Once you accept it, once you say, "Look, I need to put up with someone who's incorrect," and I have some like really good reason to put up with people who are just like have very different views than me. Then the next question comes like, well, those only practical reasons. Like, is it just like, oh, I don't want to fight?
Hmm.
I think we think there's an additional reason to tolerate. And it's hard to put your finger on what it is because it looks like it's a reason not to push the truth. And this is paradox
Hmm.
of tolerance.
Hmm.
But most people understand. And I always use the case of like an interfaith marriage here. So if a Christian and a Buddhist are married, you could kind of insist as a Christian that the Buddhist convert all the time.
Hmm.
But your reasons for not doing it are not just that it wouldn't work.
Hmm.
There's some sense in which like they're kind of owed space
Yeah.
to figure things out on their own, even if they're wrong. And I think when we think about that for politics, we realize, I think as Rawls eventually did, that it wasn't just true about religion, it was true about secular doctrines as well. People think Rawls was like this aggressive secularist. It's not really true.
Yeah.
Um,
He
I mean, it's
started
true
off as a
secularist.
seminarian, I believe. So
Yes, I mean, well,
yeah.
he was a deeply concerned with the doctrines of the Christian faith and whether they were true
Yeah.
or false.
Yeah. Yeah.
Early on, and he decided they weren't, but he thought a lot about it. And
Yeah.
but the the interesting claim though is like for Rawls, like that ultimately he realized applied to his own conception of justice by the end of his life. He was like, "Uh-oh." I developed a theory of justice to resolve conflicts between competing claims like 40 years earlier. The whole
Hmm.
point of justice was like to resolve these competing claims, but then there were competing claims about what justice required.
Hmm.
And so then, you get all these questions. Uh-oh, how do we coordinate across disagreements about the good, religion, justice, and so on? Now, some people would just say, look, that paradox of toleration means the whole thing was a mistake. We should have just gone for what was true. Why bother with all of this? I have plenty of friends in the profession. They're like, I hate all of this sort of tolerationist liberal stuff. Like, there's autonomy and it's true, and let's just go for it. Or like, there's Christianity and like, it's just true, and let's just go for it.
Hmm.
Right. But there's still, I think that moral phenomenology, we do think there's a reason on top
Hmm.
of someone else not being able to persuade someone successfully, of not trying to sort of force them to come our way. Um, and of course, like you can't fully realize that neutrality. You can't fully realize any political value, though. Its inability to be fully realized doesn't count against its goodness. Um, so the question is how to actually make sense of that given the patterns of diversity that we have. And the reason that that's significant for legitimacy or the authority of government, why should we obey the law, is that we might think that um, it's a little odd in a world that believes in human equality to just like owe the government obedience because they're just people, right? Why would we owe just them obedience? Well, maybe because he consented or something like that. And I think the better account, and I believe there's an account of divine legitimacy as well. So, like, follow Nick Wilderstorff in this. There's like two accounts of why she should obey the laws. A theistic one, we owe God obedience under certain cases. But then there's
Hmm.
this other account, which is the one I've worked much more on, which is that basically what we owe to each other is it obedience to a certain domain of the law and those procedures
Hmm.
as a matter of respect for one another's sort of like basic dignity, but also a certain kind of an account of our autonomy, not in some robust like autonomy is always amazing, but in that specific sense that I said, that there's that kind of space or deference that we owe to others, even when they're mistaken. And because of that, when we have different opinions, we have reason, each of us, to go along with certain political procedures for resolving disputes between us. We can't be persistent losers forever and just go along with that. We don't have to tolerate constant loss. But there are various times where I think being a good and virtuous person and citizen means being a good loser. It's not popular to say on Twitter these days. Being a loser is
Yeah. Yeah.
equivalent to
Yeah.
being bad
Yeah.
and weak. But part of being a good citizen, I think, is being able to abide by a decision that one lost. Just like being a good
Right.
human is not always getting your way,
Right.
right? And so the big question for me is, look, if part of what we owe each other is a certain kind of respect, then part of that's abiding by shared procedures for resolving our disputes. So the reason a disagreement is significant is not sort of in itself exactly. It just presents itself as a source of conflict for which we need authoritative solutions in order to have sort of good moral relations with other persons.
Hmm.
To create an order in which we can have things like trust and friendship and love in a stable way,
Hmm.
without which it's very difficult. Um, so that's the kind of broad sense. So what disagreement's doing is it's making plain the need for procedures that can resolve our disputes in ways that we can all tolerate and live with.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. So what you're describing here, I believe, basically is what goes by the name public reason liberalism.
Yes,
Uh,
without all the jargon, because
and,
I've used a lot of it in my day.
yeah, yeah. And so what this is, I know one of the things that you spend a lot of your time defending. So what is public reason liberalism? Just like quickly defined,
Hmm.
what's your favorite argument for it? Why does it
Yeah,
matter? Any,
yeah. So, public reason is a way of justifying liberal institutions, but it's also
hmm.
taken to be an expression of like sort of underlying liberal values about freedom and equality.
Hmm.
And it boils down to a principle of public justification, which, just says that, to treat others with respect or to realize some moral good, um, you have to be able to show that the coercion you're imposing on others can be justified to them in terms they can appreciate. So not just because it's true. So think about
Hmm.
it from your perspective, like epistemic
Yeah.
internalism, but applied to moral duties. But
Yeah.
not all of them, just the ones that we direct one another to follow. So the idea is that a traditional formulation is respect for persons requires the justification of coercion, the public justification of coercion. So the idea is to think about it as a kind of multi-perspectival justification for the use of power. Does it make sense by your lights? Does it make sense by my lights, as well? Um, the exercise of power. Um, Now, why I think that it's true, I've spent a lot of time on this because I think there are some false starts. For me, I think there's something internal to the logic of trust, where if we have a diverse society and we want to be trustworthy in each other's eyes, then the kinds of norms and laws that we want to have are those that we can all conscientiously commit to, so
Hmm.
that we all know that one another are following them based on actual moral conviction. So think about it like this. When I trust someone, there's often a question. Are they doing that thing because they want to? or because they have to. And if we think they're just doing it because they have to, we're less likely to be able to trust them. But if we think they do it because
Mhm.
they want to, like it's like coming from a good place, like their values or or something like that,
Mhm.
then the thought is like that's a basis for trust. Now, in a diverse society, we have lots of perspectives, and so if you have a system of laws that can be publicly justified, that is just the one where everyone can follow them, but at least in part because they want to, and not just because they have to.
Mhm.
And that serves as a basis for trustworthiness, which is the ultimate justification for trust. Um, so if we want high levels of social institutional trust in a diverse society, we want to insist upon public justification. And then it will turn out that the only institutions that can be justified to diverse publics are something like liberal institutions, with things like constitutional rights, um, the rule of law, democratic voting, the market economy. Not like a fully libertarian one, but a basically capitalist economy. And then I have arguments for
Mhm.
all of those claims as well. So if you take a foundational commitment to respect for persons as free and equal,
Mhm.
a recognition of the sort of like fact of diversity and diverse perspectives, um, you want to try it to get certain basic social goods like trust. You want to justify coercion in this multi-perspectival manner. And then you've got a procedure for justification or justifying coercion that can generate a case for liberal institutions.
Mhm.
And that's more complicated. But
Okay.
I mean, a lot of liberal
Yeah.
institutions
Yeah.
are about being a good loser, right? It's like free
Yeah.
speech,
Yeah.
right? Like you might lose the argument, right? Like voting, you might lose the vote. Capitalism, you might lose the sale, right? And like the key for liberalism isn't that it's the best. It's a way of it's letting people lose without losing everything.
Right. Right. Right.
And that can be justified. It's Churchillian, right? It's like democracy is the worst system of government except for all the others. It's like my liberalism's Churchillian. It's like the worst system except for all the others. It's everyone's, I think it's like most people's second choice, except for
Mm.
like some integralists I know who really have told me they would rather live in an Islamic regime than a liberal one,
Okay.
which is just not true.
Uh-huh.
Um, but they can go to Saudi Arabia, I guess, but they haven't.
Well, so you bring up religion, and it's often raised as an objection to public reason liberalism that it
Yeah.
requires people to effectively sideline their most deeply held commitments, not only
Yeah.
religious commitments that often comes up, but Rawls himself, whom we mentioned, says that behind the veil of ignorance, we're supposed to even forget about our religious requirements. And so some people hear this as the view that, well, okay, so liberalism sort of requires me to not really be myself in the public square, and so doesn't that end up actually sort of like being an oppressive type of regime to people with commitments that like aren't really compatible with such sidelining. So yeah, how to respond to that kind of challenge that, as
Mhm.
integralists and others often raise.
Yeah, yeah. I've written a lot on this, and as many
Yeah.
things you write in a lot about, it's kind of hard to break it down. So the
Yeah.
very
Yeah.
first thing is just on the Rawls. The veil of ignorance is not really a part of that argument. There's a lot of confusion
Okay.
between Rawls's positions on like deliberative ethics
Hmm.
and then like the selection of principles of justice. Those are at very different ends of his system.
Yeah.
So behind the veil of ignorance, it's not actually us. So here's what's going on.
Okay.
Rawls is ultimately interested in figuring out what justice is by the method of reflective equilibrium, right? It's like we take our different moral intuitions and we're trying to adjust them so that they are coherent with one another. And he said, well, look, that's really hard to do. And so we need a decision procedure to kind of like figure out how to reach reflective equilibrium. Well, one thing we could do is we could imagine a group of hypothetical people that were
Hmm.
modeled in such a way that their choices would be more likely to track what reflective equilibrium implies. So you imagine people that are both rational and reasonable. And if they're reasonable, they're going to try to be in some sense impartial or be concerned with reciprocity. And that means when they choose the rules that they want to live under, they shouldn't consider stuff that would bias them.
Hmm.
Because otherwise, they're not going to come up with principles of justice that harmonize our considered judgments. That's what's going on. So a lot of people were confused about that because Rawls did not really make clear exactly the relationship between his like moral epistemology, like the reflective equilibrium and the original position until political liberalism. So it created like a massive amount of confusion. And it's
Hmm.
a lot of it's on him. But like, and so when I say like people who are critical of Rawls in that way are confused, like they are, but like I understand the reason, at least up until
Yeah.
1993 or whatever. So so set that aside. So what
Yeah. Yeah.
Rawls is
Okay.
saying later in his later work on religion is to say,
Hmm.
well, look, if we're interested in interpersonal justification, then religious reasons aren't shared. And so we should like exclude them from public discourse because we should be concerned with justification in terms of public reasons, and religious reasons are private reasons. So it's like you're a bad citizen if you bring your religion into politics. That was his preliminary position, which he came to call the exclusive view because he accepted that like that was too exclusive. And he said, okay, later he said, well, you said have an inclusive view. Like you can bring religious reasons in whenever you want, but you always have to like pair it with public reasons. And then he was like, well, I guess they don't have to always be paired. As long as the public reasons appear in due course, as he put it, and got in a lot of trouble
Hmm.
for that. Like it's fine. So like Martin Luther King talking in Christian terms, perfectly fine because there were public reasons that would appear. And then like Paul
Hmm.
Weichmann gets in there, and it's like even looser. So I called it so the view I just described is like the wide view of public reason, as Rawls calls it. And then Paul says, actually, you only ever have to be prepared to give public reasons when you're challenged. So it's
Hmm.
totally legitimate for a citizen to speak in exclusively Christian terms, so long as you say, hey, do you have a reason I could accept for what you're proposing? But of course,
Hmm.
if no one ever asks you that, it's fine.
Hmm.
So in Paul's interpretation, I call it the double wide view of public reason. It's an even weaker view. But my view is even weaker than those, which is like at this point, like, why do we care that we're speaking in shared terms at all? As long as the institutions themselves are justified interpersonally, to hell with the shared reasons.
Yeah. Yeah.
That whole business about principles, what Chris Eberle's called doctrines of restraint, deliberative restraint.
Hmm.
It was just a mess. A lot of it had to do with confusing what's deliberation and what's justification. And ultimately, all of the stuff trying to mess with people's deliberations all presuppose that if you messed with the deliberations in the right way, you would get the right justifications. But they never showed that. They weren't able to tell a causal story about, well, if we talk this way, we'll get laws that are publicly justified. It never even
Yeah.
began to show it. And so there was never a good rationale for the doctrines of restraint in the first place, in my opinion. So a big part of what I did early career was making the argument that we should just like do away with principles of restraint completely.
Hmm.
Just like get rid of them. And if that's the case, there's no restriction on religious discourse or religious voting at all for citizens.
Yeah.
Legislators, however, and Supreme Court justices are different. I do think legislators have a duty to try to legislate in ways that are acceptable to multiple perspectives. So ultimately, the reason I'm not a Christian nationalist is I think, well, there are non-Christians here, and if we're going to push them around, which we have to push them around, we want it to be in a way that they can appreciate and see as justified. But the case where I'm most convinced is the Supreme Court. I don't think that judges should be like, well, I'm a Catholic, so I'm going to rule in this way. Like, I think we
Yeah.
just think that would be inappropriate. And I actually don't think like basically like anyone thinks it would be. Rawls' mistake was to generalize from the case of the Supreme Court to citizens. Rawls actually had an argument. It was that, look, we think in the Supreme, like if someone cited a papal encyclical in the Supreme Court opinion, that would be
Hmm.
outrageous.
Hmm.
And he just thought that was just part of the office of the citizen, but then he just gradually weakened his view. And so I actually agree with Rawls, but I actually think even Adrian Vermeule would in some way agree that like I know Amy Coney Barrett
Interesting.
certainly agrees. Like you
Yeah.
like if Vermeule or Supreme Court justice, I don't even think he would be inclined to start citing papal encyclicals in. I mean, he might do it to troll a little bit, but
Uh-huh.
not that Supreme Court justices are always about have never done that.
There's a little
Um,
trolling occasionally. Yeah.
yes, but all the same. I think we do have this intuition that, like, if you're a judge and your job is to enforce a constitution, mm. So sometimes I think we just like totally appropriate to exclude religion from politics in very confined domains, very
There.
confined domains.
But do you think there is a possible case there that that I think of at least when you can imagine a Supreme Court justice does find him or herself in a situation where the Pope says one thing and the Constitution says another, and to be a good Catholic, the person has to go with the Pope, and to be a good public reason liberal has to go with the Constitution. What do you
Has to,
think
then they
about such
resign.
a case? Okay. Okay. Uh,
But I don't think, in my case, the public reason liberalism I support would be asking them to do anything terribly far away from what they already think of as their duty.
mhm.
So, I mean, a lot of my public reason stuff is not just some like arbitrary imposition. It's an attempt to
Yeah. Yeah.
articulate the practices implicit in constitutional democracies already. So,
Yeah.
like, I would
Okay.
modify my understanding of public reason if it turned out like I normatively misunderstood what was going on in judicial reasoning.
Hmm.
So it's like very important to get across that like the idea of public reason isn't just like some random political philosophical principle pulled out of nowhere. It's an attempt to articulate like the principles that keep liberal democracy stable.
Yeah.
And so it's subject to a sort of empirical challenge from like the actual practices that exist. It's not naturalistic exactly because it's not a metaphysics,
Hmm.
but it is subject to empirical challenge because of the kind of goods it's trying to realize. So, like, if trust research changed, then my understanding of public reason like would change. So it's important about this because a lot of your listeners like they have a picture of political philosophy that's kind of like doing metaphysics, right? It's like
Hmm.
you try to come up like with like the true like a priori principles or
Yeah.
whatever.
First principles. Yeah.
And for me, like, yeah, you do that, but coming up with political principles, at least some of them, are pretty far downstream. And the
Hmm.
fundamental principles are things like principles of toleration. And so the doctrine of public reason is like just very downstream of first principles. And part of the way we arrive at it is by combining first principles like toleration with the practices that we know are successful of constitutional democracy. So I really do think what I'm trying to do is partly an exposition of like moral truths as they have arisen in constitutional democratic practice. I mean, that's the sense in which I'm a conservative.
Hmm.
I'm not trying to just do ideology, trying very hard not to do that. And I see public reason as partly a way of combating that.
Well, maybe there's a good opportunity for clarification there, because you said you're a liberal and you said you're a conservative, and some people
Indeed.
would therefore be very confused. Of course, I'm not
Yeah.
confused about how you reconcile these, but yeah, do you want to explain
Yeah.
how you reconcile those ideas?
Yeah. I mean, Anglophone conservatism itself is a liberalism conservatism hybrid. In many ways, the whole fusionist or Reagan right was an attempt to preserve the American liberal democratic order as they understood it,
Hmm.
which was a liberal order. It was the first true liberal order, except for maybe England and the Netherlands. But it
Hmm.
was the first sort of expressly democratic order.
Hmm.
And so I'm an American conservative, but I wouldn't be like a European conservative.
Hmm.
Um, so what I'm trying to preserve is the classical liberal order, the order of liberal democratic capitalism, as I understand it.
Yes.
Um, so in that sense, I'm a conservative, but there's also a deeper sense in which I'm interested in reasoning from within my the sort of data, intuitive data that my civilization has given me,
Hmm.
and that as a sort of kind of love or gratitude or patriotism, try to make sense of that
Yeah. Yeah.
before I move away from it,
Yeah.
defaulting to what I inherited and what I was given, rather than jumping outside of it. Although, of course, in that case, Rawls is also conservative in that respect, in that very narrow respect. Um, so,
Yeah.
I think, that's the sense in which I'm talking about conservatism in this case. But there really are ways. If you think our tradition is the promotion of the protection of liberty and virtue, then anyway.
The aside about Rawls there, I think, was interesting actually, because if I think about how I would try to explain political liberalism to somebody who was not familiar with the concept, I would probably say something first and foremost about freedom, the prioritization of freedom, and the thought that, like, that liberty broadly construed is the
Yep.
fundamental political value. However, as you've cashed out public reason liberalism, and maybe as Rawls thought about it, it's perhaps the prioritization of stability more than individual liberty that
I mean, it's
provide.
interesting.
Yeah.
The public justification principle is up against a presumption in favor of liberty.
Hmm.
So there is a kind of normative presumption that the political power is what requires justification and not the reverse. Part of that is because it maintains stability. But my next book's called Liberty, Virtue, and Order for a reason.
Mhm.
And it's because the relationship between liberty and order is really quite complex and subtle. And ultimately, the goal is to develop conceptions of liberty, virtue, and order that I think hang together in a coherent way that are mutually determining. I mean, it's a complex project, but I think that attempts to put any one of these values as the center, just virtue, just liberty, just stability, all lead to very predictable problems.
Mhm.
Um, Virtue with authoritarianism, stability with stasis, and liberty with license. So, ultimately, like the correct political philosophy can't like take every value as fundamental, but can choose a small cluster of values as kind of like the core, and then try to make sense of the rest in those terms. One of the things I'll be embracing in the book is kind of like a little bit of pluralism in terms of normative foundations, a little bit of pluralism in terms of political concepts. So, if working with multiple concepts of liberty, for instance, is one of the things going to work. Can we keep a lot of balls in the air with respect to like negative freedom and positive freedom? Um, so, we'll see how it goes because when you accept like multiple fundamentals, it's always a little bit of a mess. But I just think that's also part of the conservative tradition. It's like just being really kind of uncomfortable trying to think that reason can work so effectively that it can sort of harmonize everything under a single, say, first principle or whatever.
By your lights, do the critics of liberalism have a tendency to mischaracterize it? And I asked.
Yes.
I mean, that's a pretty loaded question, but I mean, I ask that because some of the post-liberal descriptions of liberalism sound pretty awful, but then I don't
They
know that
also
that's
sound
how.
awful to me.
Yeah, so I was going to say, I imagine they sound bad to you too. So yeah.
There'll be a chapter in the book that I've gotten a bit of a draft on, I suppose, where I talk a lot about the late 19th and early 20th century liberals' attempts to make liberalism less atomistic
Uh-huh.
and less and more friendly to community and concerned with the common good. Decades and decades of them.
Nice. And okay, maybe I'll ask you a
And they've
question about. Yeah,
just
yeah,
forgotten.
yeah.
But political theorists like Patrick Deneen have a responsibility not to forget them, and he did. In fact, weirdly, he seems to accept Rawls's weird thing of jumping from Mill to
Okay.
himself, with maybe
This is
mentioning Dewey.
yeah. So, okay. So this is exactly
Oh,
what
except
I
for
wanted.
Sidgwick. Rawls
Yeah.
is all over Sidgwick.
Mm, mm, okay. Yeah, I have a soft spot for Sidgwick myself, but
Well, he's pretty great. I mean, I'm
yeah,
not
yeah,
trashing it. I'm just saying Rawls is kind of a weird understanding
yeah,
of the canon.
yeah, yeah, yeah. Okay, so it is the canon question that I wanted to maybe run past you before we. I want to transition to talk about artificial intelligence, which is not
Yes.
really totally disconnected from our
No,
discussion up to this
no,
point. But before I
no.
do
It's going
that,
to
yeah,
change our
so
order
so I can
and what freedom is and what virtue
yeah,
involves.
no, but I think I've experienced the sort of canon problem that you just alluded to myself, because there does tend to be, even in, among people who have too many advanced degrees, like we all do, and I, have studied a whole lot of political philosophy. There is a tendency to, go like Hobbes, Locke, Mill, maybe Sidgwick, and then you like jump ahead to Rawls, um, and a lot of stuff happened in between. Are there a few authors maybe that you
Yep.
think that
Hmm.
somebody who like encountered that
Yep.
presentation of liberalism and then thought, oh, that's sort of, there's something missing there, maybe I should be a post-liberal? What should such a person read by your lights?
T.H. Green's Liberal Legislation and Freedom of Contract is a lecture he gave to the Liberal Party, which, by the way, if you want to read a lecture that someone gave to a political party and you want to be impressed,
Yeah.
um, there are things that his student Bernard Bosanquet wrote, but there's his great treatise, The Philosophical Theory of the State, which is like very collectivist, but very liberal.
Hmm.
Um, but the most readable,
Does it even make one feel the warmth of collectivism? Sorry, I couldn't resist.
he's an absolute idealist. So, yes, there are no individuals.
All
You
right.
couldn't be more collectivist than Bosanquet.
All right.
Um, he,
Well,
he thought
the current
socialism
mayor
was
of New York may
atomistic.
enjoy him. All right.
Well, I mean, Bosanquet has a speech to the Fabian Society, which is the democratic socialists in Britain, where he made the case that socialism was atomistic and individualistic.
Mm.
Um, which I think for post liberals should really read that Green speech and then read that speech to the Fabian Society, and their categories will explode, because it is not where things were before. But really, the most accessible thing on this, the two most accessible things, there's John Dewey's Liberalism and Social Action, and then there's L.T. Hobhouse's book Liberalism. Um, so, I mean, Dewey's all over this. I mean, all liberalism, social action is like the previous liberalism's too atomistic. And then what Deneen will be like, well, but that's what gave rise to progressive liberalism and all of this, like, you know, like sexual liberalism. And it was like,
Hmm.
well, but no, I mean, just because you think women should be able to vote or whatever, it's not like a slow slide to like TikTok or OnlyFans or whatever, right?
Uh,
Um, so they're really very concerned with community and democracy. I mean, Dewey's
mm.
like super, super concerned about community, and liberalism and refitting liberalism so it's compatible with community. And the fact that you can't even get a real discussion of Dewey and why liberalism failed is just intellectual. Well, let's see. He should have done better.
Uh-huh. Uh-huh.
Um, because you've got basically like a solid like 60 years where people are trying to make sense of all of this in Britain and the United States, if not more.
Yeah.
And even Mill, for all his trouble, I mean, all the hell he's given, was
Uh-huh.
very concerned with these matters. I mean, it's weird. It's like he's a utilitarian and an individualist and a socialist.
Hmm.
He
Hmm.
kind of wanted to be lots of things,
Yeah.
and had lots of interesting arguments. So, I mean, Mill's got it in any case.
Yeah.
Um, Dewey, Bosanquet, Hobhouse, Dewey. Oh, sorry. Green, Bosanquet, Hobhouse, Dewey. Those are
Uh,
like four of the chief middle liberals, as I call them.
yeah, and I will say that it's of those, it's only Dewey that I've read, and I'm
Yeah.
probably not that rare. But yeah.
No, no. The Green is probably the Hobhouse is the next place to go. Is his
Hmm.
book Liberalism.
Okay.
It was very famous in its day.
Oh.
Um, and it's just been utterly forgotten. It's really compelling. I just think I should like I look at it and I'm like, this is pretty good. Like if we lived according to this stuff, like things would probably be pretty good.
Hmm.
Um, I mean, prefer everyone to be Christians, right? But like they're not, and they're never gonna be. Belief is hard enough as it stands, you
Hmm.
know. Uh, I would really like to have shared institutions other than the church to help me be a better believer and help my family be better believers and help everyone, right? Like that
Hmm.
would be amazing.
Hmm.
I would love that. The question is, in lieu of that, what do we do?
Right.
And what may we do to others who disagree in order to get there? That I think is the really important question. What are we willing to do to people? So this is my answer to the Christian nationalists. They will never really tell you. So like you ask Doug Wilson, well, what are you going to do to Jewish people? It's like, oh, not that much. And then you ask
Yeah.
the younger guys on Twitter, like Partridge and Webben, and they're like, well, we're going to ban synagogues.
Yeah.
And they're sorry for your viewers if some of them like them. They're wretched,
Yeah.
those
Yeah.
guys. I mean, Wilson seems like a really nice guy. He's like deeply wrongheaded. But when they're coming after him for being too pro-Israel,
Uh-huh.
I don't know if you saw that. It was
Yeah. There's a lot of anti-Semitic ugliness in that
ru
world. Yeah.
revolting.
Yeah.
I mean, just real stomach churning stuff. So the point is, like, when you actually ask the people who are like, let's just go for the truth, let's just go for it, like
Yeah.
what they want to do to people, either
Yeah.
they shrink back like Wilson does, and then it's like, well, why are you shrinking back? If you
Yeah.
theorize that,
Yeah.
right? Or you like fall into like clear, we're going to ban all the Hindu temples, we're going to ban all the mosques, we're going to ban all the synagogues. Okay, well, if you're Protestant, why not ban all the Catholic churches?
Yeah.
And I mean, maybe they'll go there next when it becomes based and cool to do that.
Yeah.
So, I guess for me, I always want to know with the new right and all of the sort of Christian nationalists or integralist crowds, like, what are you willing to do to the people that disagree? Like, how much are you willing to hurt them?
Hmm.
Because you're gonna have to hurt them a lot.
Hmm.
And I think from my perspective, she's like, I don't really want to do that.
Yeah.
Like, it doesn't seem like what Jesus wants from me. And so when I really try to puzzle through, like, what am I willing to do to people to get to a Christian social order?
Hmm.
That's the hard question, right? Like, should we want one? Yes. Should we want a Christian society? Yes. Should we want a Christian government? In some sense,
Yeah.
if we were all Christians, why would we want our leaders to not be Christians? If all of us were Christians, why wouldn't we want our government to declare that Christ is king?
Right.
Of course, it would be awesome. It would be completely amazing if all of us could agree that Christ is king, right? Like, I'm for that, right? Like, you said it here first. Kevin Vallier is a Christian nationalist, right? I'm really more of a Christian internationalist, if you had to put it that way. So all this immigration stuff is,
Yeah. I'll
you
tweet
know,
those things out with no
yes,
context.
I am a Christian nationalist. Yes. But like the means, man, it's the means. What are the means to get there? Right.
Hmm.
And there's no good answer to that question. So we're told all the time by these folks, we have to win, we have to fight. Right. It's like, okay, well, what tools may we use? Because
Hmm.
you can't use all of them, presumably. Like, you can't torture, like, there's some limit, right? Like, morality limits the way in which we can win. And my challenge to like all the Christian nationalists, the integrals, all of them is just like, give me principled moral limits that allow you to do what you want to do and that are consistent with the things that you want to rule out. I've never seen, really, no one on the new right, I think, has ever provided a good account of when the ends don't justify the means.
Hmm.
I think that's their chief issue, and I think they're reaping what they sowed on
Hmm.
that right now.
Hmm.
And so one of the reasons I'm a public reason liberal is like the best way for me to make sense of like what am I willing to do to people who disagree with me, and what are the limits and when. Now I
Right.
took it further than a lot of people because I think I'm just like very squeamish about hurting people.
Yeah.
Um,
A
um,
squeamishness, which I share. Yeah.
yes. So, and I think that's a lot of liberalism. It's just like violence is awful.
Yes.
Like no one, like it's never good. Like in the real world, when I see two people fighting or like a policeman beating someone getting beat up, it's ugly.
Yeah.
When I look at violence in the face, it's ugly. And
Yeah.
it never ennobles anybody. In a movie, yeah. In life, every time I see two people like fist fighting, I'm like, that's a failure.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I totally agree. And yeah, I read Steven Pinker's. Yeah, it's right back there. Better Angels of Our Nature many
Yeah,
years ago. And there are criticisms, I'm sure, that
yeah.
are
His whole thing
merited.
about the Enlightenment is,
Yeah,
anyway.
yeah, yeah, yeah. So I have my issues, but like there's a general point there that does seem worth making. Human history is really violent. There's been a lot of hurting people in human history, and it does seem that there's a striking correlation between this process that we now call liberalization and a big
Yeah,
decline in that, right? And there's at least there's something to that. And
yeah,
I've always thought that if somebody like who's interested in some of these post-liberal critiques, it would be nice if the post-liberals were more interested in that correlation, right? Because
yeah.
yeah, like
Well, they
what's the
just bring up
story?
their big response is abortion. They
Hmm.
say
Hmm.
once you count up all the lives that were lost, then and what their presumption is that their regime would protect it. But when their golden boy won't even stop the abortion pill from being approved, um, Vance, I mean,
Hmm.
um, it's sort of like, well, okay. I
Yeah.
mean, Republicans control every branch of government right now. Like if they're going to do a pro-life thing, the only reason is they're worried. Is Trump's been very clear. It's like I don't want everyone to lose a bunch of elections because there
Hmm.
are people who disagree.
Yeah.
And the only response to that is, well, okay, if we're not going to have a democracy, what are we going to have? And then you start getting to integralist land. It's like, okay, well, maybe we should have a monarch. Okay, well, and then you get in like the classical questions like,
Yeah.
who chooses the monarch? Like, is it
Yeah.
going to be a Christian monarch? You
Right.
know?
Yeah. Yeah. And we have
So
tried this. I mean, Curtis Yarvin wheels this out as if, it's a brand new idea to have a monarch. That's been tried before in human history.
It's just so wild to me. It's just like that's just like it like the best argument for monarchy is just like it's been overwhelmingly dominant, right? It's like there's something natural to it or something. And it's just like the way that things go.
Hmm.
I think, they're rarely willing to just be like, it's more like natural to have a king. I think the evidence that democracy is like for just instrumental reasons, like it's just better in part because there's like, it's pretty clear like who's in power and
Hmm.
why. And it's pretty clear that like you have peaceful transitions of power. Like that's cool, right? Like not having succession crises, that's pretty good.
Yeah.
You don't have to
Yeah.
worry about going to war when the king dies.
Yes, that is nice.
It is very nice. It's also nice that like if someone's like totally corrupt, they will get thrown out unless you're so polarized that people can't agree on what corruption is.
Right.
And then you've got a little bit of a problem.
Yep. Yep.
Um,
Well,
so
maybe I can't help but ask the polarization question then. I mean, yeah, so
we
what
got
what
to
are the
do AI, man. We got to do
I know we
AI.
do. I
It's like I
know we
keep
do,
going
but there's
on.
so much to talk about.
I know.
Yeah, I mean, so can liberal institutions survive the degree of polarization that seems to in part be a product of emerging technology, social media, maybe AI is going to make it even worse. Yeah, do you have thoughts about that?
Um,
I feel like this is
I
the
mean, it's the
2010s now and everybody's talking about polarization all the time, but
yeah, yeah. I know it's well. I mean, I was talking about it all the time in part because I thought it was going to be persistent.
mhm,
And while like it's certainly playing out, my worry with AI is that like we just don't know
yeah.
what's going to happen because I expect there to be a realignment. Every time there's like a major technological shift, like things get really different on the other side of it, and this is coming on faster than ever. So for me, can liberalism handle polarization? Like that was an issue until last year, like 2024. I was like, that is not the question for America anymore. Like it is a question. It's like very important, but like it's not the most important question anymore. And here's why.
Okay.
So one of the reasons we got into so much polarization had to do with our information environments. Like one reason,
Hmm.
right? Like cable television, right? Talk radio, social media. It was going on for a while, right? Like from the breakdown of the major news networks, as soon as you got things like talk radio and cable TV, it got worse. Like those
Hmm.
mattered. They weren't the only thing that mattered, but they got worse. Um, and then the social media, it got worse still. So what I've been developing is a concept of what I call intelligence environments. And intelligence environments are your exposure to reasoning. It isn't just your exposure to information. I mean, your information includes reasoning, but your exposure to reasoning agents
Hmm.
instead of it just being in your head or other humans. And so, like, there are many people who kind of live their lives now, and I'm one of them, where for many, many decisions, I consult AI. Now, for the most big ones, I take them to a human, but if there's no one around, people are asleep or whatever, and I have to figure out, oh, does my back hurt? My back hurts. Like, what's going
Yeah.
on?
Yeah.
Right? Or like, I'm gonna go to the gym after we're done with this podcast, and I'm gonna be like, hey, ChatGPT, like, what did I lift last week? Because I got my records in there. And then I'm
Yeah.
like, I'm not really feeling this exercise today. Like, how many reps should I go for? Right? Or like, what's an alternative exercise I can do? And then it will just tell me. Right? And then at night I'll be like, hey, here's what I ate. What were the calories in them? Or here's a picture of the food. What's the calories in the food? Or like, did I say my prayers and I make a list? Or like I journal spiritually, but I can journal spiritually because ChatGPT's app is an amazing transcriber. And then I just have like this perfect, like totally perfect journaling. Um,
Yeah.
so yeah, I mean, I use it a lot for all kinds of stuff, but I try to set up my intelligence environment to make me better. Now the interesting question is going to be like, okay, well, what happens when these companies are setting up intelligence environments for people? Well, we already know and could start to see the nightmare of it, which is, Facebook slop, right? Like that's
Right.
the worst
Right.
part. People
Right.
finding the companions,
Yeah.
whether they're just talking to AI and that's their girlfriend or their boyfriend.
Yeah.
Um, that's the low end. But all we know is like very crude but real opportunities for vice, right? Things, pornography, like failures of temperance, like that's a big deal. Failures of justice, like failures of connection, and then deception, also, right? Just like massive amounts of fraud. So that's a risk. But there's also good uses, right? People setting up intelligence environments to make themselves better at their jobs. or help them to remember to serve others,
Right.
or to help them become more healthy. So what we're going to face is like this intelligence environment situation, and we don't really know what the effect will be. It might exacerbate things, or it might change them in some really strange way. Because here's another feature of intelligence environments: they get better fast.
Right. Right.
And
Yeah.
social media is not like that. It doesn't get better in the same way. It doesn't get smarter, right? But like the models get smarter,
Hmm.
and faster, and more of them, and they can do more things. So now there's Claude, which is the CLAWD.
Hmm.
Claude is the Anthropic's AI, but Claude is an agent, basically a kind of way of using AI where people are buying Mac Minis now and just have it because it's so insecure AI. It will use your AI subscriptions to do tasks for you for like 24 hours, and you can just ignore it. Um, and so now there's like, agents that can perform tasks that are like 12 hours long. Um, so you just can there are guys out there like San Francisco that have like a stack of 5 Mac Minis just doing all kinds of crazy stuff all the time. We don't
Wow.
know what they're doing.
Wow.
Um, so what happens when like everyone's got 24-hour agents? If the scaling law of that appears, not scaling pre-training, right? That did level off
Hmm.
some, right? But just in terms of the you've seen the charts, like the amount that AI can do, not the autonomous tasks seems to be doubling every 7 months. Opus hit 4.5 hours at 50% success at the end of last year. That logic, we get something like 12 hours at the end of this year.
And I know a common response that you'll get is that it has to do with the energy intensive use. Or sorry, yeah, like the intensity with which these models use energy puts some kind of hard physical constraint on how fast improvement
Hmm.
can go. Do you have
And yet the
thoughts
models
about
keep getting cheaper because they keep
they
finding
keep?
better
Yeah,
algorithms. So,
yeah,
DeepSeek, for instance, they just published a paper like a month ago where
yeah.
they found some algorithms that looked like they might like greatly cheapen the process. Because it's the Chinese companies that are trying to find the ways to get more intelligence out of less compute because we have restrictions on chip sales, and they're
Yeah.
behind. And so all their companies are always trying to figure out the cheapest way to do stuff. And the Chinese are very, very good at this. Make a commercial product that's extremely cheap that everyone will buy. They're really,
Right.
really good at that. And
Right.
so the algorithmic space for this stuff, we've only begun to explore, right? But the price of intelligence is falling faster than the price of any other
Mm.
commodity ever. Um, so the question is like how much can that continue? And my thought is if it can go until there's commercially viable quantum chips, it can keep going a long time. Um,
That's my hunch as well. Yeah.
and so we don't know. Now, the interesting question to me actually is whether there's like some organization of intelligence that's the maximum. Like
Mhm.
this, like it just like at some point, it just like talking about being smarter, like you're a 300 IQ, it's just like not. There's something about it that doesn't make sense. There's like a
Mhm.
maximal mind, like a,
Mhm.
a maximal finite mind.
Yeah.
Um, that's just something I'm toying around with, where it's
Mm.
like it can't get smarter. But then what's going to happen is they're just going to make more of them.
Mm.
And then
Yeah.
it'll be
Right.
like
Right.
us, and just be lots of them interacting. And then you've just got
Right.
Adam Smith and the division of labor, and it won't even matter if the individual model is maximally smart because there'll be 10,000 instances of it. I mean, Dara
Yeah.
Amadei's thing, he thinks there's going to be like data centers with millions of agents in them all operating all the time here at the end of next year. Um, so it's like, what we have to be thinking about is like, okay, there'll be polarization, but I think there could be realignment in 28 where Vance decided not to regulate AI at all.
Mhm. Mhm.
And the post liberals who should be completely for regulating it has said nothing because
Yeah.
they want to be
That's
on the Vance administration, and they Vance wants Silicon Valley money. And Thiel's,
right.
he's getting that support. So, it's totally corrupt.
Oh.
And it'll be interesting to see if the public holds them accountable. It'll be interesting to see if the Republican Party primary voters could hold them accountable if a lot of them are losing
Mhm.
jobs. Although I'm not sure they will because it's a lot of blue collar workers, and
Mm.
so they actually probably do fairly well for a while with the data
Mhm.
centers and everything.
Until robotics catches up, basically, which may be a while.
Exactly,
Yeah.
exactly. But that's that's a while. I mean, the tacit
Yeah.
knowledge in the world of actually getting a lot of that, that's going to take time.
Yeah.
I,
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
mean, I think you and I will live to see it.
Mm.
But like
Hopefully. Yeah.
the immediate issue, or just massive consequences for knowledge work and the effects of that,
Mm.
um, and political consequences are also considerable, because you're going to have things. For instance, just for your listeners, imagine it's 2028. We're coming up on the general election, and the Vice President Vance, the Republican Party nominee, phones up Elon Musk and says, "Elon, you've got Grok 7 monitoring Twitter and monitoring things from Starlink. What are the Democrats up to today? Where are they focusing their efforts? Where are their campaign headquarters that we didn't already know about? What's going on? Give us the patterns, compute the patterns, make predictions based on it." And the other AI companies won't help the Democrats,
Hmm.
right? But there's one, the fourth best AI company. And by then, Musk is so good at building technological infrastructure. There's never been, I mean, say what you will on Elon Musk, but in terms of building tech infrastructure, there's no one who has ever lived
Oh,
that
for sure.
competes with
Yeah.
him. He's manufactured more than any other human ever.
Yeah.
And his ability to build out things, I would never underestimate him ever. That guy builds rockets. He can build
Yeah.
data centers.
Yeah.
And so Grok 7, they got Grok 5 cooking, right? Like Grok 7 could be like incredibly impressive,
Hmm.
especially if you got all the infrastructure from like Tesla, all the data from Twitter, all this stuff, right? Um, that can make a difference. It didn't have to make a big difference. So then it's like, okay, now maybe we fit AI as it's looking now into our just standard polarization. So AI is a right wing thing and anti-AI is not a right wing thing. But like that's a really bad thing for the left to choose. And it will cost them like very quickly a lot. Like I think their incentive to like just be dumber um is low. In fact, and I'll get into some trouble for this, but like the left has usually been smarter than the right overall. And this is essentially to functionally seed that in a really big way. Like imagine you've got all these like right-wing people, they won't do this because I don't know why. They won't get as many likes. But like they could
Mhm.
improve the quality of their arguments massively all the time.
Yeah. 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 Yeah.
Already, if they wanted to. I'm not sure they
Yeah.
will, but like anyone can. But and eventually, so the interesting question will be like the whole nature of the way that intelligence filters into politics is going to be totally different, right? It's
Yeah.
not going to be like, oh, these people have college degrees and so they're more effective at this than people without them. Like I have no idea what the dynamics will be. Like none.
Hmm.
In fact, one of my challenges to my like big IQ nativist friends is I've been trying to tell them like, well, okay, but now like all of your like straightforward predictions are like really messed up, right?
Right.
Because like there's now these artificial neural nets, and how do they interact? Like, what does it even mean to like have a high IQ now? If like functionally, you got
Right.
two people, you got a smart person and they've got AI, and a super smart person has none.
Hmm.
Who wins in like any contest, basically,
Yeah. The smart person
right?
with the AI. Yeah.
Yeah. So it's like, okay, it's not an equalizer though, because I think smarter people are better with AI. Um, but like it's not obvious.
Yeah.
And so even like the whole balance of the way we think about intelligence is different. And so the result of all of this is, in my mind, is we have to go back to thinking about political economy. And we have to think about who's going to own intelligence
Mm.
and not in terms of consciousness, raw problem solving ability. And how should we assign property rights to what I call agentic capital? Now, I'm going to define it because I've got this big project I'm building towards. Agentic capital, the capital good is a good that can make other goods, right? It's an asset essentially. So you keep it around, right? You don't need it, right? Tomato is not a capital good. A shovel is the capital good in a very
Mhm.
simple way, right? Big capital goods are things like factories, right? You don't need it, but it makes stuff you can eat, let's say. Um, Agentic capital is capital that can act autonomously and spawn autonomously. That is, produce more instances of itself. We have a lot of stuff that can do some autonomous stuff. Not a lot that could do a lot autonomously. That's a big deal. But ultimately, automation is something we're kind of familiar with. Like it's not like a radical change. But the ability of instances of the ChatGPT to spin up versions of itself to imagine this. Just imagine when ChatGPT can go to its own website
Hmm. Right.
and it can make whole branching trees of problem solving, right? So one becomes two, becomes four. We'll have assets, economic objects that can deliberately self-replicate. And there's nothing else like that in nature. We're the only
Yeah.
like truly rational creatures. Everything
Yeah.
reproduces that's alive, right? And
Yeah.
but we reproduce very slowly. But like we don't have like really reflective creatures that can just be like, oh. So like if you were to say, like,
Yeah.
suppose you could just like produce more copies of yourself whenever you wanted,
Yeah. Yeah.
you would do a lot of things, a lot of
Yeah.
different things than you could do now. You're just like, okay, like I could have X or Y, or I can spawn and have both.
Right.
Right.
Yeah.
And so I'm trying to model what happens to the economy and politics when the capital structure becomes agentic. And I call this, and I think we're entering what I call the period of agentic capitalism, where we get this whole layer of capital that can act and spawn autonomously.
Hmm.
And I think that it's highly consequential. And it's highly consequential in part because um, it kind of collapses. It means that agentic capital will have features of biology and economics at the same time because it can deliberately replicate. And so
Hmm.
that means there'll be selection effects between AIs that are reproducing and spawning. So just to see this, for instance, for your listeners, imagine, they get a nice AI like Claude, but then like Groks are more prevalent. And so they have to go into exchange relationships and they have to bargain. And it just
Hmm.
turns out that the Groks are just like better at lying,
Right.
right? And the
Yeah.
Claude doesn't get chosen because Claude's bad at lying, and so it doesn't produce the same returns. And then the Claudes go away because they're not commercially viable, and then we've got a sea of bad Groks. So even if you have a nice Claude in a sea of bad Groks, it doesn't matter that Claude is nice because Claude will lose.
Yeah. Yeah.
But it's just the logic of selection. It's just applied at the level of economics in a way that there are lots of sort of deep continuities between biology and economics because there's selection along different dimensions. But in this case, because the Groks have more returns, so now there are more Groks, and they get more compute, and so there's more Groks, right? And so there's if most of our economic transactions are being carried out by these models, as I think they almost certainly will be,
Hmm.
because they can exchange really fast, um, who's going to align the ecosystem? So the whole thing I'm focused on is how to defend a free and virtual society when we've decided to run headfirst into like this like wild new world. And even the AI companies themselves are only thinking about aligning the individual models.
Yeah.
So right now, the models have just started to be able to interact. So for instance, the Claude browser extension can go to
Hmm.
Google
Hmm.
and it can Google something, and that's using Gemini now because they put it in AI mode. So Claude can use Gemini. Um, but why wouldn't they be talking all the time? So if you had your AI, I have my AI, they need to interact to solve some exchange that would be awkward for us to work out, right? And they know us, they have their memory or everything. They go and they figure it out, what our exchange should be, right? And then we say, okay, that's cool. We'll hang out while they're figuring out, I'm going to buy something off of you. They go figure that out, right? Like that's a very simple thing, right?
Yeah.
Or like you imagine there's, a man and a woman are trying to figure out whether they want to have a relationship. And so they just
Hmm.
like let their AIs communicate. They don't want to tell each other their secrets, but they let them talk, and then they come back and they have a report and they're just like, we think there's a 52% probability you get divorced in the first year. And it turns out they're actually not completely wrong about that.
Yeah.
So there's going to be like all kinds of, I mean, just think of a stock market, man. It's just like, it's already the case that trading algorithms do almost everything. So
Yep.
why would like, I'm sure there are finance pros right now that are are having deploying these models to make their trading decisions and developing algorithms. Lord knows how many instances are actually doing trading already. There will be trillions of them, I assume. Um, so what are we going to do about that? So no one's thinking about the interactions. And because no one's thinking about the interactions, my whole thought is our entire context for politics is shaped by the Industrial Revolution, all the technological consequences that came from it. If we're rushing into this even larger change, we have to understand the actual dynamics of what's going on. And so that's what I've been focused on the last like 6 months is just recognizing, okay, this is going to be a thing, or it might be a thing. And so we need a framework of order to think about what's going on and how that things are going to change. And I'm also developing an account of the virtues under agentic capitalism. And the main one I'm working on now is what I call cognitive sovereignty. And it's the ability to be a kind of master of intelligence where you use the models and they don't use you, and other
Right.
people don't use you via the models. And I actually think it's going to be extremely important for stability that people have this virtue, to
Mm.
the important point where I think like government may have to intervene to help cultivate it if it can. Because if it doesn't, you don't know there's anything between you and another person. You don't know whether you're dealing with another person. And then the
Hmm.
whole basis for trust is lost
Right.
because
Right.
you have to know the thing you're dealing with is a thing that can be trusted and not just
Right.
relied upon. Like you don't trust
Yeah.
cars.
Right.
And so the whole basis for social cohesion could be destroyed.
No.
Um, I'm still working on these arguments. So this is, you heard it here first, I guess, if it turns out to be any good.
There we go.
But I do think that the critical risk of AI is if you destroy cognitive sovereignty, you won't just destroy individual well-being, you will destroy social well-being. Because the whole bait, you can't trust that there's anyone behind anything. And I think that could be catastrophic. Because it could accelerate a trust collapse. So you could see why I would be interested in this for lots of reasons, given the other things that I'm interested in.
For sure.
But
I
we,
mean,
you know,
I mean, given all of these dire scenarios, I if you could flip a switch, would you just shut down the relevant data centers and
so
ban
I
this,
would, I would,
or
I
what?
would great, I would, if I could had a switch, I would slow model development.
Uh-huh.
So the data centers are great as long as the models aren't dangerous.
Hmm.
As long as, I mean, the models that we have now, I mean, I'm just not that worried about them.
Yeah.
If even if there's a billion Grok 4s, it's like, okay, they can't do a whole lot,
Hmm.
right? But with the claw, as you will now see it all over your feed. Like people are like, I'm out of Mac Minis. They're out of Mac Minis. They're buying all this stuff, so they can have something work for 12 hours for them. Um, that they're like shockingly insecure to the point where the people who recommend them are like, get a Mac Mini so it's not on your regular Mac because you will lose all of your information because someone will hack it. Like that's how unsafe it is. That like the people raving about it are like, buy a separate computer and do not put your stuff on it. So people deploying, it's not even the AI companies, right? So like if I had a switch, it would just be like, oh, you're going to introduce a new model that could do like, you know, so I ultimately would do some model development slowing, I think is what I would do. And then this is actually what Demis Hassabis, who's the CEO of Google DeepMind, they make Gemini, and the Daria Amadei, who's the CEO of Anthropic, just agreed over the weekend. They were like, we would agree to slow down, but China will not slow down. And they didn't say this, but Musk and Altman will not slow down.
Hmm.
I actually believe Amadei would slow down. Hassabis, I'm less sure about, but I know I don't trust Altman or Musk at all. Um, or the Chinese, who I consider by far the most dangerous. But we're in this horrible coordination problem. So those you were right
Yeah.
to ask about a switch. So yeah,
Yeah.
that's what I would do. I think data center infrastructure is awesome. I'm just like
Hmm.
I think, yay, blue collar jobs, janitors, awesome, electricians, spectacular. Like people like totally missing living in Northwest Ohio. It's like, yes,
Well,
jobs,
I, I
rebuild.
focused I focused on the data centers because it's not really clear how you impede AI development without just
Well,
cracking
they're
down on
owned
the
by the
data
AI
centers.
companies. If you they're
Yeah.
usually owned by the AI companies.
Hmm.
So you slow down their model development. They're just not allowed to deploy models on the data centers. Now you might say, oh, they would
Okay.
do it anyway, and
Yeah.
something would get out of control. And okay, so you'd have to do something about that.
Yeah.
I don't want to slow manufacturing.
Yeah.
I
Okay.
just want to be able to have a somewhat slower rate of model development. And does that mean I don't salivate over a new model because now Opus can do my expense reports? You know, like, well, no. I mean, I think it's awesome to have these models.
Yeah.
But that's because So far, Anthropic and Google have set a really high bar. And OpenAI has had to set a high bar,
Yeah.
relative, I'm lower than them because they look really bad. Um, and then Musk is just kind of doing what he wants
Hmm.
but it's not crazily unsafe. There are liability reasons that he's going to have to worry, but and ChatGPT, I mean, it's been good that they could actually be sued.
Yeah.
That's important. Social media companies not being able to be sued has not been good. Like Zuckerberg should be able to be held responsible for some
Hmm.
stuff. So I'm also hopeful that that will help. I think that like, the competition in the market has been good, but also just like I just think Anthropic's like a good company. I just think they tend to make good decisions. I really like that they publish what their models do wrong. Um, um, so I just think we're kind of fortunate that we do have some good actors among the model among the not only good actors, but we do have some good actors. But yeah, if I had a switch, I would slow down model development. I don't know exactly what process I would put in place. Um, in order to vet them. But one of the things I'm so frustrated about in the current policy environment is like the Trump administration is trying to prevent states from even figuring that question out by trying to tie their hands. Now he ultimately won't be able to, but that's I think for me probably going to be a decisive reason not to vote for Vance in the primary. Like I think I already had decisive reasons, but like I think that's like pretty near decisive. Like saying the 50 laboratories of democracy are not even allowed to try, that's a serious affront.
Yeah.
And like a pretty severely anti-democratic in like a really nasty way, in a way that could hurt humans as such,
Right.
right?
Right.
Which I just consider unconscionable. I mean, so we'll see what happens.
Yeah.
But someone's got to figure out the dynamics, what's going on. And so there's all this rush in philosophy to do AI ethics. And my view is it's too individualistic.
Hmm.
It's not PPE enough. That is philosophy, politics, economics.
Yeah.
You
Yeah. Yeah.
gotta
Yeah. Yeah.
So that's my big thing right now is trying to think about conservatism and liberalism under an order of agentic capitalism, um, which is I think coming upon us very very fast. And I'm very very concerned. I mean, think about it like this. Let me dramatize it since you're a philosopher too. So every time
Well,
we
I
introduce a new
pretend to be at
kind,
least.
well, every time we introduce a new kind of replication into the universe, or every time the Lord allows it,
Hmm.
something changes, right? There's like we get any kind of reproduction with life. Oh, we got our first replicator. Okay, cool. And then what happens? Well, we get meiosis, right? And so we get, tons of diversity, incredible complexity, far more rapidly than we got with mitosis, right? Okay, well, like what's the next replicator, right? Well, um, mimesis, right? Like the spreading of ideas, the copying of ideas. Well, you get way more diversity at a far faster rate, right? Um, okay, well, now we get self-replicating tools, self-replicating digital tools. I'm calling it poiesis. It's I want to wait on that one.
Yeah.
I want to slow that down. I don't care about. I mean, look, there's a libertarian to say this, but like, I'm not that worried about automation. Like, people say, "Oh, we're going to automate this and they'll lose their job." I'm not that worried about it. We find
Yeah.
other things to do. We demand new stuff. We find new jobs. Automation is like not. It's usually awesome, but like there are costs. But like usually it's like totally worth doing. And once you do it, everyone's very happy that we did it.
Hmm.
Um, it's this ability to expand, to grow and evolve. That's the piece that makes me terrified. And the thing is, even many of the people worried, like the big doomers, even they are worried about like a single rogue AI or like a single rogue model. And it's because they don't have the right social ontology. They all think it's the model that acts, it's the instances that act. And once you
Hmm.
see that, you see there's lots of instances and you see that they
Hmm.
could fight each other. So Dario Amadeus says, "Oh, we might have a nation of Einsteins in a data center." And I wanted to say to him, like when he posted his new essay, I was just be like, well, what if they go to war with each other?
Right.
Like that's the doomsday scenario to me
Yeah.
is a catastrophic AI conflict, right? At an incredibly fast speed. Like they don't all have the same interest. They're doing whatever their users want them to do. They're going to have as
Yeah. Yeah.
much reason to fight with each other as humans have to fight with each other. So I think what everyone's missing is of the whole game theoretic aspect of AI alignment. Um, my doom, my doom
Your
scenario is not
yeah,
one AI hurting
your
us.
P doom, as they say.
I mean, it's not nothing
Uh-huh.
because n- I'm worried about sufficiently advanced AI finding a thing to fight about and us becoming collateral damage. And the reason my P doom is not very low is because no one smarter than me seems to be working on this problem.
Yeah,
And no one dumber than me is working on this problem. But like, there's a lot of people way smarter than me in this space. And like, I'm talking to them and they're like, oh, yeah, they'll interact. And it's like like as a PPE guy, I'm just like pulling my hair out. I'm like, that is the social problem, right? Like the problem is not making a nice human. The problem is keeping us from destroying each other, even if we were all nice, because we think one another are not so nice.
yeah,
Like that's the problem. Like that's the social problem, right? Um, so it's like I'm disturbed because all the people doing the alignment are like neuroscientists, like former neuroscientists, computer scientists, and are all like, "Oh, we'll tweak this individual one." But if you were to
hmm
say to like Hassabis and something like, "Well, what are you going to do when Gemini's interacting with OpenAI? Like, how are you going to align Gemini when OpenAI has a different philosophy of alignment? What are you going to do when they disagree? How
right,
are you going to handle this to bring it full circle? Like, how do we handle when like ChatGPT and Gemini disagree? Like, who's going to align the interaction?
yeah,
And what should the rules of their interaction be and who should set them? And
right,
ultimately, we're going to need some kind of AI constitutional moment. Um, and I've got ideas, weird ones about self-modifying constitutions that they can update. And so they have like meta rules about how to update their own rules. Because our constitution has the same structure, right? We can amend it.
right, right.
But it so so in any
In
case,
theory, yeah,
there's a whole yes, but many there's a whole host of problems about how to maintain all the problems of liberalism in terms of diversity, disagreement, conflict, toleration, difference. All of it will reproduce itself in AI. And so that's the problem with which I'm completely occupied. It's just like everything that I've worked on, trust, all of it just like totally reproduces itself um, in the AI ecosystem, either in how humans interact with AI or between the AIs themselves. Not that they have
yeah,
views exactly, but
yeah, yeah.
if Brian is right, there's a non-trivial chance that they could have views eventually,
Right,
even if substance dualism is true. So you and I are
right,
both substance
right.
dualists. You're substance dualist, right?
Right. I think so. Yeah, I think
Yeah.
it's the most probable view. And that's Brian Cutter
Yeah.
for those
Yes.
interested. Yeah, yeah.
Yes, you
Well,
could always link his paper in the comments
well,
because it's
yeah, we'll do.
kind of scary. Yeah, but yeah, not to tell you to do your job. It's just it's just he's you went to school with him and I think we're both admirers of him.
Yeah, yeah, no, his work is really good.
Yeah. Anyway,
Maybe a good closing question because I want to be mindful of your time with which you've been very generous here. Especially including early technical incompetence from me in getting the link properly sent to you. Uh, yeah, so you've had really interesting thoughts about AI. I think I first encountered your thoughts about AI on X, um,
yeah,
and yeah, I mean, you are simultaneously somebody who is obviously, as this conversation reveals, really worried about uh, all sorts of things that could go wrong if it's not rolled out in the proper way. And yet, I know that you make heavy and interesting use of it in your own life. And so, do you have thoughts that you might want to share as we're closing out about how to integrate AI in a healthy way into one's life? Like, are there principles that
yes,
you've
yes,
adhered
yes. I,
to or
I have an
something?
essay coming out on Friday from the Cosmos Institute on this, on called
Cool. Okay.
on the noble
Well,
uses of AI.
all right.
It's all about using AI to replace lower value thinking with higher value thinking. Now, I'm not saying I always do that because
Hmm.
all of this is very new, and I've gotten sucked into rabbit holes and misuses and all kinds of stuff. But
Sure.
I'm experimenting with this stuff in part because I'm convinced that I told myself as a Christian political philosopher, if like a big social change happens, I am not going to let the secular people be the only ones who understand these tools. If there's a bunch of
Yeah.
new tools, so another reason I threw
Interesting.
myself into this, I'm like, I'm totally going to understand these tools so I can tell other Christians and theists and so on about what to do.
Yeah.
The first thing is you got to make a choice about how you're going to use AI before you get too far into using it
Mm.
for everything. Um, and the other thing you've got to be willing to tell the people in authority over you, like if you have a spiritual director or something, what you're doing with it. or at least friends and family, what you're doing with it. So that you don't get caught in these stupid rabbit holes that people get caught into. The other advice I have is like I've had to avoid using Grok because I just think it's just like Musk has just set it up to just create a lot of temptations that are really stupid.
Mm,
And so I tend to shy away. I tend to shy away from Grok for moral reasons. It's nothing to do with Musk himself. It's just it's hard to put up the right kind of safety guardrails that I think are important.
mm,
Because I know it's going to be able to be increasingly graphic with time. Um, that's one thing. But the main principle, besides guard it like you guard your mind and heart on the internet, apply all of those principles, is to try to use it in ways that offload things that have less value, objectively speaking.
mm,
Um, for me, it's nice to use ChatGPT when I go to the gym or the hotel when I'm traveling because it can translate, say, oh, this exercise is equivalent to that exercise. If you put it in thinking mode, if you have a subscription, that would be a case where I could have lugged something around, but I just had my phone. And so I just used it and asked. I could have done the research, but that
mm.
time I didn't need to. I could have freed that up
Yep.
and I can do something better with that time. Or like
Yeah.
all the
Yeah.
modeling I'm doing with agentic capital theory, I'm using AI very, very heavily to teach myself a bunch of economics that I didn't know. There's things I've given up to do that, but I've written less philosophy as a result. But I actually think I'm doing higher value work now
Mm,
because instead of working on more sort of less relevant problems, I'm working on like actual like how to align AI ecosystems, which I think is like going to be very important. So that's another way in which I think AI is allowing me to do higher value work rather than lower value work. I also think, and this will be my most controversial recommendation, but I'm quite serious about this because it's benefited me tremendously, which is just to like work through medical conditions and medications and write up if you get subscription to these big research reports and then take them to your doctor.
mm.
If there's I recently found I was taking the wrong medication for something. And I'm really glad I found it. And I would not have found it with AI because it found like it reviewed like Google Gemini's deep research reviewed like hundreds and hundreds of studies and like made a persuasive case that I was like a very important medication. It was the wrong one. And I changed and it was like a big deal. Like I'm talking like quality months, like qualitative
Wait.
life years, months.
So you wouldn't have found it without AI?
No,
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Right.
no,
Yeah.
no. So, but never do what it says medically for anything high stakes on its own. So just to be
Yeah.
very
That
clear.
makes sense. Yeah.
But like being around longer for
And
my
we're
children,
not
like that's a
offering
high
medical
value.
advice here. We're not
No,
that kind
no.
of
But
doctor.
like, but it's a
So
high value use, right? Like it is
yeah.
seriously like high value use. Or like fixing something in the house, or like figuring out how to cook for my kids. I can put ChatGPT in voice mode, put the camera on if you have a subscription, and I can say, am I boiling this too much? Or am I overcooking these eggs? And it will tell you. So there's lots of different uses, but you just have to go in and say, okay, is this freeing me up from doing something that has less value? And am I doing something more valuable now as a result? That won't
Yeah.
always be obvious as you're learning the tools.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
So some experimentation is fine, but that's for me the critical principle. That's the individual principle. Now, finally, there's a social principle.
Okay.
And this is the one where I think it's a bigger problem for me. Um, it really ought to be able to be used in ways that improve your social connections rather than degrade them.
Yeah.
So my problem is I'm so worried about AI like hurting people that I'm spending like a tremendous amount of time trying to get these models right. And so like the big thing, just be like frank, like the big problem I'm having right now is like, okay, well, can I get it a little better and not knowing how much better I can get the model and or like, okay, here are the policy levers. Like, okay, let me integrate more studies into this. And I feel like because I'm very worried, like things are moving really, really fast. And I'm worried that like a lot of people are going to get hurt really badly. And it's going to happen before we know what we can do. And I read the alignment stuff coming out of these coming out of the AI companies, and I'm like, they're like, this is very strange. It's like aligning the US and the Cold War. Like it's like not the thing to do. Like it's not the right way to think about it.
Mm,
So my temptation, and again, just I have to be clear about this, like not getting so caught up in the fact that I can do pursue my research questions in far more detail because I don't have to wait around to talk to anyone.
Right. Right.
So that's for me the major struggle right now is just like cracking problems and just like the joy and the hope that comes from being able to crack problems and that being
Hmm.
just something I just want to do way too much. Just like
Hmm. Hmm.
because so I think just to be clear, like I think like I've there are rabbit holes that I've gone down. I like to think there was something noble in it, you know, that I'm trying to do some good.
Yeah.
But if I want to give anyone experience from a heavy AI user who's Christian, it's just like you really do have to be careful that it doesn't isolate you. Now, there are ways I think it can help your relationships. A lot of your listeners are probably a little awkward in some ways, like me, because if they're interested in philosophy,
Yeah. It's a hazard. Yeah.
it's a hazard, but it's a train on the sum total of human writing. And I find oftentimes Claude has better social judgment than I do, like about how to be kind.
Yeah. Yeah.
I think Claude is better at helping me figure out how to be kind. Um, they help AIs help me remember stuff for my kids. I can get notifications. I could have done it without AI, but I could just tell them, come up with something, or helping me to figure out what a cool gift is.
Mm.
If I can't think of something,
Hmm.
you know, or so I just think there's a lot of noble uses.
Yeah.
And it takes a lot of experimentation, but high value over low value uses.
Yeah.
Try to offload the worst stuff,
Yeah.
and then on top of that, don't let it isolate you.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. That's really helpful, actually. I think those are very good thoughts.
Yeah.
And
Well, thanks for letting me share them because I really do. I
yeah.
really am doing this in part because I do think the world is changing, and I want, especially theists, to really feel like they don't have to play second fiddle in another technological revolution
Well,
like
yeah,
we
and
have
I
in the
think that
others.
that's a good point. Yeah, no, and I do. It does seem like a lot of people in religious communities have a kind of aversion to AI
Yep.
that, yeah, that it does sort of sideline them from these discussions and poses
And not
the
everyone should
risk
use
of,
it, but
yeah,
I do would
right.
say to the religious listeners, if you feel like there are people in your community that can use it well and understand it, these tools are improving very rapidly.
Hmm.
And the secular folks that run these companies, we don't want them to be the only ones who know that what they can do. Not because
Right.
they're bad people, but because they don't have a sense of the ultimate
Hmm.
in the right way. Like we know something they don't know. And for them to have total control over puzzle solving ability, it's a really bad idea. There are many well-meaning Marxists. We should not have let them convince people they understood the economy. It's
Hmm.
very bad for Christians, bad for everybody. Okay, like that was a mistake, right? And so we can't sit on the sidelines. And that doesn't mean everyone should do it, but it does mean that some of us have to understand it. We have to understand it. And the other thing I would say is like we have to give some people permission to understand it because we
Yeah.
need our communities to be able to defend ourselves when it's turned against us, because it will be. And I think that just has to be borne in mind. The strategic political dimensions of AI are wildly unattended to, and the
Mm.
spiritual dimensions of it being used against us. Um, that cannot happen. We cannot allow ourselves to be dominated again. We spent the 20th century having the industrial system and people theorizing who should own it. It's almost entirely secular. And the 21st century does not have to be like that. It just doesn't. We know better. We should learn our lesson. And that means we can't just sit on the sideline. And we didn't ultimately with the internet, like we didn't totally sit on the sideline. And I think that's been good in a lot of ways. I like that you're doing this. Um,
Thank
you
you.
know, so I'm glad that that's out there. And I think theists won the YouTube wars. I mean, like we threw in,
Yeah. Yeah.
we threw in and we won. So like it can be done. I think theists beat the new atheists online. They,
Yeah.
they they won. They won because they fought online. Like that was like a genuine cultural victory for theists. Just like they won the
Yeah.
argument.
Yeah.
Um, so Anyway.
There we go. All right. There's more to be discussed in the future,
Oh
I'm sure.
yes.
So maybe we can do this again sometime. But
Yeah.
for now, I think Claude would advise me to thank you, and so I'll stop.
Yes.
I'll
You're
stop
absolutely
recording.
right.
I'll stop recording, and then maybe we can say our
Yes.
goodbyes after that. Okay. So
Yes.
let's
Sure.
see.
Sure.
Oops. Recording. Stop.